feel like every plaintiff side attorney right now in the US is getting offers from big tech to go into director of employment litigation positions because their layoffs are omnipresent these days. And for whatever reason, all these big tech companies have decided that they want to hire plaintiff side attorneys for the director of employment litigation role. So everyone I know gets offers every single week. And it's fascinating. In New York, I should give the specifier in New York. And so you see a lot of people who are very good at their jobs looking at guaranteed really great offers and saying, my client spit on me last week.
Yeah.
And I could go make X amount of dollars to work 6 hours a day. I'm sure you don't work 6 hours a day. I'm being facetious, but that's the perception for us, right? That we're doing 12-hour days and people treat us like garbage and it's a fight every day. We're hitting the brick wall and we could just go in-house and be happy. That is how we see it.
So I think that there are a couple of things that are, there is some truth to that, I suppose, especially at very established companies with maybe a very big in-house department and, maybe a very consistent kind of workload and so on. So it lends to this, I'm doing the same thing every day and managing the cases. And generally as in-house counsel, you're not always, unless you're litigating the cases directly, a lot of times, especially as general counsel, you're managing the litigation, but you're doing less of the you're not writing motion unless you're trying to save some costs or something and you're barred in that state. It gets complicated, but here's the thing. In-house counsel is a different kind of tax, right? And the tax is this. First of all, you have to become an expert at kind of everything. And the way I describe it, and I said this before, is it's like I'm an assistant manager of a Home Depot of law because, I'm asked to resolve an employment issue, a real estate issue, an insurance issue, a professional negligence issue, a license, which is come into question, a tax issue. As general counsel, I have responsibility for everything. And at the end of the day, half the time, I don't even have a lot of control. It's not like I can say, well, let's change out these people and do these new things. It's like I have a certain degree of influence, but not all. And you have to become very familiar with what the corporation itself is like, not only in terms of its operations and what it does and its product lines and who does what, but also sort of the informal networks that govern the corporation between friendships and relationships and issues. So it's navigating an institution. Your law partners are all lawyers, right? They're lawyers. You have, obviously staff, which are great, and you may have really tight relations with them and all that. But at the end of the day, you have a bunch of lawyers who, you can talk about a question of law, it all works out. At least up to a point, and then you have to decide on economics and case and all that. That's one thing. But in a corporation, you really have to understand the dynamics of the people. You have to get to know them. It takes a while. People aren't going to always open up to you in 10 minutes. So there's like a cost of that. It can be good, especially if you like the people, right? But then they also have problems amongst each other. And I guess that's also true in law firms, but maybe a little less so. So I think there's that. I think there's a lot of work in terms of the variety. Now, some people say, oh, that sounds fantastic. I'm sick of doing this particular one type of case day in and day out. But it's like, how do you learn and get better if every case or every situation is new? Like, where do you take that, to your next step? I don't know. There's something about that which has its pros and cons. It could be more interesting, but also more like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And that happens a fair amount of time. I think that is really valuable. I think those corporations which are looking for plaintiffs' counsel are smart because they're looking at people who did the work. Sometimes, I think that, the fact that a lot of plaintiffs' counsel have actually argued cases, written motions, briefed things, had to evaluate the whole thing, looked at statutes, looked at, know how to look up a case or several cases. I think that's very valuable. So I understand why that's happening. As to why tech is doing the way tech is working right now, I think they're not doing it so well. I don't think they're being very smart, but that's
so many issues. Agreed.
But basically the bottom line is that I think that being in-house does have a secure paycheck, and I'm not having to like bill in increments of 6 minutes and spend all my, sometimes it's frustrating to bill, like I'm billing a 6-minute or 12-minute increment and it took me 12 minutes to bill the increment, right? Like, because the system is nuts. So that's very frustrating. But I do think the flip side of it is, whether you like it or not, a lot of variety, get to work with a team, right? It depends on how good that team is, but you're working with a team of people. They're not all lawyers, which is good, and it's bad, right? So there's that, because you don't get the insight. I think it's just a different life. It's not a bad life. I think, though, that if you really enjoy like trial, like if you actually enjoy being in court, in-house counsel is probably not the best bet for you. You could do better and more meaningful outside of that. And I think that if you're looking for a group of true believers, you won't find it in in-house counsel. They're, still part of a corporation, which is here to make money. And that is, whether even the C-suite may be very nice people, but they also have the owners or whatever who are like, hey, and the owner may not be a person. It may be multiple layers of corporations which own subsidiaries of corporate. So you don't even know who you're really working with. I mean, it could be owned by like, a fund in Dubai, and you're working for the Singapore corporation, which is owned by a Mexican corporation, which is finally like, who do you even work for? You don't even know. So it gets really weird. But I will say in-house life, at least from my perspective, has been great. I still am a true believer and want to do justice. And I see a lot of injustice, not particularly through necessarily corporations, although I see there is, of course, a fair amount of that. But I do see it in government, there are things we could do. So I guess it's just the other side of the coin. It looks more relaxing, but believe me, there is a lot of stress, because especially as the general counsel or assistant general counsel or whatever, it doesn't matter that you didn't know about it. You should have known about it, right? It doesn't matter that you're not familiar with this area. It is your problem. It doesn't matter that people don't listen to you because they know they can continue to do their nonsense. I've had, in certain situations, people try to deceive me, about what it is they're really looking to do. And when they finally, when I call them out on it, which takes a while, you can't just automatically start saying, I think you're lying, but you can start. But after you develop enough credibility, you can say something like, so what you're saying is you want to do this, and you know that it probably is the wrong thing to do, but that's what you want to do, isn't it? And then eventually they're like, okay, I got caught, and they know they can't do that, but it takes a bit to get to that point. So it's tough in its own way. It's got a lot of complexity. It's like a new Groundhog Day every day, except it's something new. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. You don't have a team, like you have a different kind of team, but it's not the team of lawyers who are all, it's not a bunch of sergeant or privates who are all been in the same combat together who are going to go head out into that trench. It's more like, I don't know, people at a kind of just a minor league, like a softball team or something like that.
Got it.
They're not into the trenches with you, but they're happy to know that you're willing to go. I guess so. Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective.
Plus, you're never going to get a contingent fee. You're not going to go and win the big case. There is no big case to win, right?
I don't think people fully understand. I remember being a solo, and a friend of mine was like, "Hey, man, you won that big. I saw it in the paper. You won that big case." Like, yeah, it was great, thank you. And my buddy was like, "Well, how much? I don't want to be rude, but how much do you earn per year?" And I thought about it. I was really thinking about it. I was like, well, some years it's negative at that point. Like you're putting out money on these cases, and like you can end up in the negative for a year. Like if you're not putting up wins, it's very easy to make negative dollars in this practice. And I don't think people understand that.